is the chief Washington correspondent and the host of the podcast, The Takeout from CBS News. It's Major Garrett. Major, thanks for taking the time. Sincerely appreciate it.
Great to be with you. And there's another podcast, too, called The Debrief, which is different than The Takeout. And if you want to know all about it, I'll be happy to tell you.
When do you have time for all of this? I mean, seriously.
Well, I think the thing that my mother taught me, she was an executive in the 50s and 60s and 70s, before that was fashionable, before it was generally permissible. Busy people get a lot of things accomplished. And if you set out to be busy, you get a lot of things accomplished. And when you're not as busy, you have more time to not accomplish things. And so I just keep myself on a pretty tight treadmill, usually around 8 or 9.
That's interesting that you say that, because I've always said if I had something that needed to be done right away, I'm going to give it to the busiest person, not the person that's sitting around, because you know they're going to get it done.
Exactly. That's the philosophy in a nutshell. And you know it and I know it. Those of us drawn to this work love many things about it, but one of the things I know I certainly love about it is the sense of daily accomplishment and the sense of daily accountability.
I agree with you 100%. Let's talk about the election. You've been covering politics for a very, very long time. We're in a pandemic, huge amount of mail-in ballots. I did the mail-in ballot, and I'll tell you right now, I'll never walk into a polling place ever again. It's turnkey. They mail you the ballot, you fill out the ballot, you sign your name, you mail it, you can see it online when they receive it. I mean, it's just fantastic. But here's my question to you. We all knew with these mail-in ballots, this was going to be a close election. Why were people so shocked that it took so many days to finally figure it out?
So newness counts for a lot in life. And when we experience something new, we have to experience it. One of the things I'm very proud of is about, well, now 4 months ago in July, whatever that is, 4 or 5 months ago. Time is very fluid right now, as we all know.
I'm trying to figure it out in my head, too.
I said to myself, you know, the election and the way that's conducted is going to be a huge story. Big, if not as big as the candidates themselves. Because I said, there's no one campaigning. There's nobody on planes. There's not 6 rallies a day, although the president certainly tried that in the closing stretch. I said, how this election is going to happen is going to be, if not the first story, the one right behind it. And so I told people for weeks on my podcast and on the CBS Evening News, CBS This Morning, it's going to take a while. I wasn't surprised, but I think people were. But the great news is we did this election. The turnout shattered records. We did it safely. We did it without anger or violence at polling places. And trust me, a lot of people I talked to were somewhat nervous that might happen.
Oh, yeah, sure.
And then when the ballots were counted, because they're paper and because they're from the mail, they're verifiable. There's a paper trail. You can't hack a paper ballot.
Right.
You just can't.
Right.
And when the hand recount was done in Georgia, I think that was a very wise decision by the Republican Secretary of State. State law did not require him to do that. Brad Raffensperger could have done it the state law way, which is just run it back through the machines. But he said, no, we're going to look at them all one by one. And it's going to be hard work, and we're going to meet the certification deadline.
Yep.
And that told everyone, I think, beyond a shadow of a doubt, these things are real. They're countable, and they are in their own way verifiable. I believe it is one of the great American success stories, not the result, the process.
You know, one of the things that this election did for us was it made people educate themselves, because the candidates were so different. It's like, okay, who am I going to vote for? Well, they did their research and they acted on it, which is a huge deal.
It is. And you could drill down and find a lot to differentiate these two candidates and campaigns and views of science and America just in the way they came at you. And that's not true in most campaigns. The way they come at you is pretty much the same. There's a podium, there's a stage, there's some funny music, and there's a crowd, and there's a bunch of flags. And it's pretty much all the same everywhere you go, and it's all the same, you know. No, this time it's like, whoa, we can drill down on this. We can get sort of a psychic temperature read in just the way these two campaigns approached trying to reach voters.
Why the lawsuits by President Trump? Is that to save face? Is that to say to his base, hey, I'm going to fight this thing, and if it doesn't work, I want you to come out and support me so I can get $1 million every time I speak?
There's a lot of that behind all of that. I don't want to try to suggest to anyone I know all of the underlying motives. I do know, because I've been around candidate Trump in 2015, 2016, Republican nominee Trump, and President Trump for all that time. I have a general sense of him. And he cannot stand losing. He never even counts the losses. Newt Gingrich told me that. I quoted him in my book, Mr. Trump's Wild Ride, that Trump just never counts the losses, so they never touch him. When you never count a loss and all you do is count victories, you're always a winner.
Right.
And for this president, that idea, that mentality, that approach to life is vital. And he also says something, he said it in speeches when he was a candidate, he said it in speeches as president, don't ever give up, never quit, never quit, never quit. So he knew, and he had to know over time, and all of his lawyers knew from the get-go, this was all futile. There was nothing in the legal challenges that was going to change anything.
Right.
And let me tell you a little dirty little secret about post-election litigation. You fight the law so you can win, period. If you're ahead, you want the counting to stop. If you're behind, you want the counting to continue. That's all there is to it. So pre-election litigation is the most helpful.
Right.
Post-election litigation is just all about getting the win you want.
Should the politicians in Pennsylvania, Nevada, Michigan, Wisconsin, and other states look at the voting process and say, hey, maybe we should start counting the mail-in ballots 2 or 3 weeks ahead of time?
So, great question. Let's go to Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. Pennsylvania is a great case because Pennsylvania, in a bipartisan basis, the year before the election, 2019, passed a whole new law about how to conduct their elections. A Republican legislature and a Democratic governor agreed on these things. Then, because of the pandemic, there were allowances made for mail-in balloting. And so all the jurisdictions in Pennsylvania, I think it's 63 counties, and the Democratic governor went to the Republican legislature and said, it would really be a good idea if we began to process these mail-in ballots before Election Day. The Republican legislature refused, not once, but repeatedly. So the delays in Pennsylvania grew out of the refusal of a Republican legislature to begin to process them ahead of time. And the grievances thereafter, well, how did all these votes get counted afterwards? Because you required it to be that way. Same was true in Michigan and Wisconsin. Democratic governors, Republican legislatures. They didn't want to have this early processing because if they had, you know what would have happened? Trump would have never had an early lead in any of those 3 states. And the one in Michigan didn't last even a heartbeat. And the one in Pennsylvania lasted a little bit of time. And the one in Wisconsin lasted a little bit of time. But if they had processed those mail-in ballots early, it never would have appeared at all. And there would have been no grievance in any of those 3 states whatsoever.
What is President Trump's legacy besides tweeting?
Oh, it's substantial. He will go down in history as one of the most influential and important one-term presidents in American history. There's no question in my mind about that. None. I would rank him. I think most one-term presidents don't get a lot of credit, and there's good reason for that. In the annals of American presidential history, you have to be reelected to have a legacy. And I think there are 3 exceptions to that: James K. Polk, George Herbert Walker Bush, and President Trump. So President Trump's legacy will be as follows. The tax cut and the economic growth, building on a very strong economic foundation he inherited from President Obama. He says he didn't have one, but he did. But still, the record low unemployment, the low inflation, all those things are on his watch, and they have to be taken into account. The transformation of the federal judiciary, 3 Supreme Court justices in 1 term, is astonishing. Plus, more than 200 at the federal court level, many of them appellate court judges who will be around for years and years. That's a huge legacy. And in the annals of the pandemic, he will be credited for one incredibly important decision. He made many blunders. He made many bad decisions, but the most important decision that he got right was Operation Warp Speed, and putting the federal government behind, to the tune of more than $10 billion, every possible vaccine, and guaranteeing all but one company, Pfizer, because Pfizer did it by itself, whatever you produce, we will buy. So go, learn, research, develop, and if you have something, we'll buy.
You're right. Yep. People forget about that, don't they?
They do. And like I said, if he had gotten the public health communication right and been more willing to say to himself and say to the country, and especially his supporters, wearing a mask is not a sign of weakness, we would be so much better off. We would have had a better summer. We would have a better fall and deep winter. but we can't unwind that watch. That's what's happened. That was his approach. And asking him to be different than he fundamentally is a fool's errand.
Do you see the Trumps inviting the Bidens to the White House for that transitional press day that we've seen, especially in the past when President Obama invited the Trumps to the White House? Do you think we'll see that this year?
I hope so. It's important. It really is
important. It is.
And people want to believe the worst about the president, and there's certainly actions he has taken from Election Day forward that make you believe the worst about him. And I think that is a sad emerging part of his legacy. The way he's handled this in the last couple of weeks, history will not be kind, and it shouldn't.
Right. And people always remember the very last thing you did.
Absolutely.
In the past 2 weeks, we've seen Joe Biden sounding presidential, and we've seen President Trump challenging the election, and former President Barack Obama releasing an 800-page book. It's like a comedy show. You can't make this up.
And there's one thing I'll say about both President Trump and President Obama, and they're unique in our period of time politically. They're both brands. They're both celebrities in their own right. Joe Biden is not. Joe Biden is an institutional political presence in America. Totally different. Joe Biden does not have the allure or aura of celebrity around him. I covered the Obama campaign in 2007 and 2008. And as I used to remark at the time, he was an astonishing figure. So young and already had written 2 biographies. What? 2? You weren't even president yet. You know? Yep. And those were bestsellers. They made him a household name. The 2004 speech at the Democratic Convention in Boston, I was on the floor of the convention.
That was it. That shot him to stardom, didn't it?
I never saw anything like that before or since. So he was a celebrity in the rallies, and they had this enormous energy and joy and electricity around them, just like Trump rallies. And I remind people all the time, if you look back at that Obama campaign and you consider that a radiant expression of American democracy because so many people who were involved who hadn't been involved before, then you better say the exact same thing about the Trump rallies. I know you don't agree with them. I know you don't share the same philosophy, but it's the same expression. And if one is radiant, don't tell me the other is repulsive. You can't.
That's a great point. It really is. I want to talk about your podcast before you go. Mm-hmm. By the way, the 800-page Obama book.
I haven't read it yet.
Who's going to be able to get through that in 6 months? It takes me 6 months to read a 200-page book.
I predict for a lot of people that will be, and look, authors don't care about this. Trust me, I've written 4 books, and I've told my friends the same thing, all 4 books. You don't have to read it, just buy it. That will be a much purchased but less read book.
Right. Get the audio version. But your podcast, The Takeout, you had Sarah Huckabee on. You have so many different characters, but I love that you had Sarah on. Very real. I mean, she was so hated when she was working for the White House. Does she deserve that?
No, she doesn't deserve to be hated. There are those who believe she could have been more truthful, that her briefings could have been more revealing about what the actual internal thought process was of the White House or what its policy approaches were really all about. But they had a very simple approach in the Trump White House. Don't get beyond the president. Don't amplify the president. Don't explain the president. The president is the president. He's the communications director. He's the most important speechwriter. He's the most important communicator. When there's no apparatus around a president to do those things, explain, amplify, and sort of handhold reporters through the mechanism of how did we reach this big decision, then you just basically stand there and repeat what the president said.
Right.
Which is exactly what Sarah did. The one thing I will say about The Takeout is the approach I've taken to the show from the very beginning is all voices are welcome.
We need to see more of that in the United States. People need to educate themselves. We're all dug in our little bunker, and we don't want to listen to anyone else. Just have an open mind. Have a conversation. Agree to disagree.
That's all I'm trying to do. It's not complicated. It used to be the central mission of this work that we do, and I've never abandoned that. I couldn't possibly think of living a life that I brought myself to abandon it, and I'm just happy I have this chance through my show to live it out every week.
Well, I appreciate your time. It's nice to see the background to The Takeout. This is your background from your podcast.
Yes,
right here.
It's the dining room, yes.
I mean, look at this. You got the dark wood. I have a brick wall.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. It got a 10 out of 10 on Room Rater, and that's a tough room. So we did okay.
I'm going to send this to Room Raider and see what they say about the brick wall back here. It's not going to be good. Wow. Major Garrett.
Look, as hostage video backgrounds go, it's aces.
Thank you, Major. Major Garrett from CBS News. Appreciate your time. Thank you, sir.
Thanks so much.
Take care.